All right. Hey, Ryan, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I was on mute, but now I'm not. Yes. How you doing, Mason?
Oh, I'm great. Good to see you. I'm coming to you from Switchyards here in Atlanta. I'm about to jump on my phone booth, but I just got kicked out, so I'm going to be taking it out here in the main area.
Just gonna say we just talked 2 minutes ago, and this is a totally different background.
Yeah, I know. So there's all sorts of people. Hopefully, how's the background
That's
noise?
fine.
Is that all right? Okay,
Yeah, you
cool.
can do it from there, I think.
Awesome. Great. Well, yeah, I'm excited to kind of continue the conversation that we had started from last week. And, I think this week we're going to expand a little bit more. We're coming off on some of the basics and just looking at like, all right, what are the fundamentals to keep in mind as you're just getting started? Everything from, hey, make sure you've got, that separate bank account set up to things to start to look at as you're bringing on your first contractors and things on those lines. This week, I think we'll be able to dive into a little bit more. So, I think, one of the questions I'd love to be able to start with, and, we've got a couple different themes that we'll go over here. But really, it's like, I think, looking at, once you approach that $1 million mark and then kind of surpassing it, and then, everything from like, key performance indicators, like hierarchy, financial needs, like all that stuff I'd love to be able to get into. But just as we're kind of getting started here, like as you're thinking about things, what are the challenges that an agency owner should anticipate as they're approaching that $1 million mark? So kind of picking up from where we left off last time.
Yeah, no. I think it's a great place to start. Which again, it's probably been a little bit in your past, but I'm sure a lot of what I'm going to say you probably remember. I'd be interested in your experience too. What I can tell you in my experience, both running an agency and working with a bunch of folks, because especially like this, approaching or having just eclipsed the $1 million mark is probably one of the most common, or at least the first inflection point of agency owners that I see that come to us looking for some help. And I mean, the short answer is, that generally speaking, agency owners are coming to us and they're overwhelmed, right? Like, it's like wearing all the hats, feeling like they own a job and not really a business. Business feels like feast or famine. Sometimes there's too much work to do and we can't figure out how possibly to solve. Other times it feels like we don't have enough to do and we're scrambling around to keep our people busy, to the degree that, we've got like good chunk of revenue. There's probably all kinds of concentration risks or whatever. Right. So, I'd say like it generally speaking, when as we talked about last week, the biggest challenge, the whole focus at the 0 to 1 million phase is really like sales and service to get yourself to 1 million. But once you get there, I mean, it is often feeling like you're sort of coasting on fumes. And so part of, we can get into like, how do we fix that? But part of the reason to sort of paint that picture is just to say, if you find yourself kind of in that realm or kind of feeling that way, like you are not alone. That is a feature, not a bug of the very first inflection point of getting to 1 million. Congrats. You cleared the first hurdle. Now we got to work our way to the point where this is a sustainable, profitable, going concern of an agency. Is that consistent with you? How did it feel for you when you were kind of at that stage?
Yeah, I think that's right on. And I think for me, it was more feeling this messy middle where, we were big enough where we could go and take on, like some serious work, but still small enough where just trying to make sure that like we're making it from month to month. And even, now like it's, every day is a gift. And I've been talking with different agency owners and with like, the state of the economy and, the sort of volatility that's out there. We thought we had kind of first quarter sold, and we got into first quarter and we found out that like things changed. Whole marketing teams went away. And so it's like, how do you kind of pivot? How do you kind of move quickly? Or, I've tried to make sure that we've planned so that's like, if we've got a couple dry months that like we're okay, we can keep the team together, make payroll, that type of thing. Backing up real quick for anyone that's kind of, tuning in, like new, like who are you and why should they listen to you?
Hi. So Ryan Watson, I'll make it quick. For those of you who didn't catch last week, Ryan Watson, I'm a partner at Upsourced. We are an accounting firm for creative agencies. As I had said last week, I'll say again, accounting firm's a little bit of a misnomer, and that we don't do the traditional like compliance services, audit, tax. Really, we partner with agency owners as their CFO, and we're going to do both organizing financial, non-financial data to help them make decisions. And then we're going to sit side by side on your leadership team, helping you interpret that data and helping you make those decisions. We've been around for 11 years. We've got over 100 marketing agencies we work with, and we've seen, all iterations of the movie that exist. Nothing's a surprise anymore.
I think one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation, we've worked together, but I haven't been able to really get like the perspective from, like we would talk about, my business, but not necessarily like here, like just the big trends, and how to think about some things holistically. So I think that the real benefit of this, next, little bit of time here is to be able to, curious around all the different kind of worlds that you've seen, the kind of those toll gates that people should be on the lookout for. And, one, either like how to plan for that, when you've hit that $1 million mark inflection point, or being able to think, right, well, this is kind of what's coming, or that you don't necessarily have to feel alone in that. It is a treacherous world. There's a lot of like, ups and downs. I was talking with a founder this morning who was like, have you experienced this? I have a project that I feel like, should be in a better place and it's not. And it's just, it is a world fraught with lots of personalities and things that can be very dynamic at times.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, totally. I mean, it's also just we talked about this before a little bit, but like, being an entrepreneur, being an agency owner is an incredibly lonely world. Like it's hard work, and there just are very few people who have empathy for what you're experiencing and the challenges you're facing. And so not only do you feel like you have the weight of other people's livelihoods and careers, but you also just really don't have a lot of places to turn, right? It's hard. And so, that's, I think, another benefit of just trying to like shine some light on, what is kind of the median experience and how you might find your way out of that scenario. Because every agency owner, me, you, Mason, who's ever come before you, they felt that too. It's tough.
Yeah. So, what would you say are some like practical things? Because there's like, we could spend a whole hour just talking about the challenges. Like, what are 3 practical things that agency owners can do when they're thinking about overcoming this revenue mark?
Yeah, totally. So look, I'd say first of all, the number one thing that we preach in this phase is focus, right? So there's nothing more important, in my opinion, than coming to this with focus, right? So for, this is I'll try not to get all the way up on my soapbox, but this is a soapbox item for me, which is, there's a lot of, there's a lot of blog posts out there about the 12 KPIs for this marketing agency and what you should focus on here. And you're going to have a lot of folks that are going to, that would suggest here, you should calculate and measure all these things, and you should manage your business in this way. And I just think that's like totally the wrong advice. And I think it's totally the wrong advice for a couple of reasons. One is, especially financial, but even like your non-financial metrics, they're all related, right? Like they're all related to one another. And so if you make progress on one, in all likelihood, you're making progress on a bunch of others. I like to call financial metrics like second cousins, right? Like they're all kind of related a little bit. Nobody knows quite exactly how they're related, but they're related. So anyways, if you were to prioritize and work your way from the highest leverage to the lowest leverage, once you sort of solve one, you're going to be surprised at how the other ones look. So there's no sense to try to attack them all at once. The other more important reason that I think focus is huge at this stage, and picking that one thing that matters and forgetting about everything else, picking that one thing, is because when you look at a sea of, like, if your gross margin is bad, guess what? Your operating profit is probably bad too. And if both of those things are bad, you probably don't have a lot of cash reserves, and your utilization is probably upside down. Like all of the classic agency metrics are probably flashing red. And there's nothing worse than looking at a dashboard that's bad news all the time. Like, what are you going to do? What am I supposed to do with this? It's awful. So like you're not gonna, that's not gonna help anybody, right? So instead, why don't we just pick one? Let's pick the one that matters right now. Where are we? And then let's focus on improving that one thing, and let's build momentum Nathan, I'm sure you agree, like there is just nothing more powerful than momentum for a business. So instead of looking at a sea of red every week, let's look at one thing and let's make a little bit of progress. 2 weeks go by, our gross margin is just a tick better. 2 more weeks go by, our gross margin is a tick better. And now this feels like an inevitability. Things are going my way. The snowball is rolling downhill. Business is easy. Like that's the emotion we're trying to convey. And then once we've attacked, we've solved that one thing. Great. Now let's lift our head. Let's go to the next one. So, that would be, the first thing, and we can, maybe a good segue is like, oh, where do I start? But, the first thing is we've got to have focus on what is the one thing that matters for this agency.
Yeah, that's it is a very tough question. Especially as like, I know for me, it's like, well, there's the one thing, but then there's also this other one thing. And then there's like the one thing that's next to that.
Yeah, some are tangential.
And as a creative person, you're just like sort of full of ideas, and it's like how to be able to like have a whole lot of ideas, but then focus on them one at a time.
I'm totally with you. One of the things we try to do to answer this question, especially in this like 1 to 3 range, the thing that we try to do to make the framework we use to make this decision as easy as possible, we've called the hierarchy of financial needs. So that's what the hierarchy of financial needs, by the way, that's TM, Upsourced. It's not a real thing. We created it, but it's how we see the world. And it's, similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the idea there is you've got to clear each stage before you can worry about the next phase. You can't get self-actualization if you don't have shelter, right? Same with the hierarchy of financial needs. I can't worry about the next phase until I clear the first phase. And so the way that we help agency owners figure out what is their one thing is we work through the hierarchy of financial needs assessment. So I'll throw out like what is, and we can circle back to any number of these ones and dive in and talk more, but whatever. But here are the 5 steps. These are the 5 steps. And at the end of the 5th step, I would argue that you have cleared this stage of growth and you're ready for the next one. The first one is just solvency. So solvency as in, can I make my payroll next week, right? Do I have enough funds to just like keep this business open? Because if I'm not solvent, like gross profit doesn't matter really. Let's just be honest. Like nothing I can do on the sales front is going to help me make payroll this week, right? I'm looking at like collecting invoices and drawing on lines of capital and whatever. So solvency. If I'm solvent, then my next one I would describe as project profit or gross margin, which is, how much money am I making on the core business, right? My AGI less my cost of goods sold, the people to service the work. And, we typically like to see like a gross margin of around 50% or better. Some agency businesses are performing well below 50%. So that's just a rule of thumb, but 50% is kind of there. If we're meaningfully below 50%, well, we have a gross margin opportunity. Stop the presses. We're not going to worry about any other metrics. That's the one we focus on. The third one is cash reserves. So if we feel good about our gross margin and we've been collecting over a couple of months now, we're focused on stashing enough cash, because these are project-based businesses generally, and project-based businesses are very chunky. And so again, feast or famine, never, it totally goes away. You just alluded to we thought we had Q1 sold and then woof, like that's just welcome to service businesses. That's what happens, right? So we got to have cash reserves so that we can sustain these kinds of blips. And we like to target 3 months of fixed operating expenses. So anyways, we got operating reserve or cash reserves. The 4th is operating profit. So now, am I actually making profit as an owner? After I pay my owner salary, is there profit left over? 5th final is what we call predictable revenue generation. In other words, a hallmark of agencies at the sub 3 million or sub 1 million, certainly sub 1 million, is my revenue comes from referrals, word of mouth, organic, whatever, right? That's not predictable. We can't forecast with that. I haven't really seen an agency eclipse the $3 million mark through that revenue generation alone, through relying on referrals alone, right? I have never seen anybody eclipse 3 to 4 million without having some amount of predictable revenue engine, whether that's an outbound sales engine or motion, or whether that's like good inbound marketing, whatever it is. So those are the 5. Those are the hierarchy of needs. And again, if you're finding yourself in this phase and you're overwhelmed and you're wearing all the hats and whatever, you're running out of gas, it's triage. And we work through those 5. We stop where we fail and we focus there and we forget everything else. And then we go to the next stage. That's what I would tell you.
That's interesting. I'd love to hear more around. So this is the thing that kind of confuses me. And,
yes.
It's like shows you where I am. But you mentioned 50% gross profit. How does that relate to, cash that I'm taking home? Like, how to break that down for me into, small increments.
Love it. Yes. Great. I'm glad that you said this, because I every time I say gross margin, I'm like, man, I think there's probably 50 more words that are required for some people for non-accountants to like get what I mean. So let's just take a project, right? So let's say, let's take a month. Okay. So let's say, I'm doing 100,000 of agency gross income revenue, revenue less pass through. Let's say like 100,000 of real revenue in a month. Okay, and my cost of goods.
That's invoices sent out, right? So it's like I've sent out, let's say,
invoices less any kind of pass through. Again, like if you're a media agency and you sent out $10 million, but you spent 9, like it's the one
media.
Right?
That's
whatever's
yours.
Okay, yeah.
We'll
so
just say
it's
like
your revenue,
street,
but yes. You've got it. It's the
street.
Invoices you're sending out. It's the invoices you're sending out. So I've sent out, 100, roughly, right? I've earned $100,000 of revenue this month, then so that's my revenue, and then my cost of goods sold is that's the money I spent in order to service that revenue, right? Like if you're a retailer, your cost of goods, if you're selling t-shirts, your revenue is how much the t-shirt costs, and your cost of goods sold is how much it cost you to manufacture or buy that t-shirt. In a service business, your cost of goods sold, or the cost it took you to service that revenue. In other words, service wages. Service wages is cost of goods sold in an agency environment. So if my revenue for the month, invoice going out $100,000, and my service wages that month were, let's say, $65,000, then my gross profit is $35,000, right? So that's how much I made just on the core thing my agency does. That's what gross profit is. How much money did I make on like the core thing we do before I spend money on what we call overhead, all the other stuff that is required to keep a business going, like rent and like, office expenses and meals and travel and all that kind of stuff, right? So gross profit, and I would argue that that's the most important profit metric. If your gross profit isn't great, neither will your operating profit. Your like net profit, how much money you make as an owner, also not going to be great. If your gross profit is good, we absolutely can make your operating profit good, right? That's the easy part. That's really just a function of being disciplined with operating expenses. That's the easy part. The gross profit part, that's the unit economics of this business. That's the hard part. That's the hard part. And so, quite frankly, when I see a new agency in that 1 to 3 million range, we usually fail is maybe a little bit too dramatic of a term, but that we usually stop at gross margin or project profit in my hierarchy of financial needs. And that becomes the opportunity area.
That makes sense. So you're trying to make sure that you don't have too many people that you've got, or that you're kind of staffed appropriately to your projects, or if you have to have, overages that are contractors, that those are kind of, it's kind of your big number. And then everything else is more of like your smaller number.
That's right.
And then it's all netting out to your net. Am I getting that?
You have got it. Yeah. I mean, so related. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So to just kind of finish the analogy, and then I want to go back to what you started to say about gross profit. But yeah, so like in the world of, okay, so $100,000 of invoices, my service wages are $65,000. So I made $35,000 of gross profit. That's not how much I take home as the owner, but it is an important number for me to evaluate the health and profitability of this agency. I've got $35,000 of gross. Again, now I have operating expenses, overhead. I pay my rent. I pay my operating, my non-service wages. I pay whatever. I pay my own salary, quite frankly. And let's just say, for example's sake, that's $30,000, right? So $30,000 of expenses that go out to all these other things. And now I have $5,000 left over. We call that operating margin or net margin. That's what I take home again, theoretically, that would be in addition to some amount of service, some amount of salary that you're paying yourself. Sub $1 million, you're probably not paying yourself a salary. At some point during the 1 to 3 million, you're hopefully getting to a market-based salary, just depending. But anyways, yeah. So so gross profit is not necessarily what you take home. You still have to pay for some other infrastructure stuff, but it is definitely the leading indicator of, can I be profitable?
Okay, I think I've got it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's like, I generally know how this stuff works, but it's like the gross profit versus net profit. It was one of those that I've had to spend a little bit more time with, and I imagine for people that are maybe new, or again, if you're within this world and you haven't necessarily worked with a formalized group, that some of these things might be just different concepts or different ways of kind of understanding the world, which again, it's about building out those structures, and those structures are what allow you to scale.
Yeah, totally agree. And again, yeah, I mean, so much of this journey through all of the stages is just about educating yourself as an owner. When I try to conceptualize, I always go back to t-shirts. I still think like t-shirts is the simplest way for people to think about it, right? Like, so if I'm selling t-shirts, I sell t-shirts for $25, and it costs me, $22 to buy them. Like, I acquire them from a wholesaler, I turn around and I sell them for $25. Then my gross profit for t-shirt is $3. And man, am I going to have to sell a lot of t-shirts in order for me to pay myself and pay my other staff and whatever else, right? Meanwhile, if I'm selling t-shirts for $25 and I've manufactured them for $5 and I'm making $20 a t-shirt, now I've got a really healthy gross margin on these t-shirts that provides plenty of cushion for me to handle my overhead and earn a net margin. So a net margin is ultimately the thing we all care about. That's ultimately when people say, are you profitable? We all mean net. We all mean revenue less. We all mean net, but gross profit is if gross profit is good, you can earn a net margin. If your t-shirts are 25 and you buy them for 5, you're in a good spot. If your t-shirts are 25 and you buy it for 22, it does not matter how efficient you are with your rent and with your software subscriptions or whatever else. It does not matter. This business is upside down. The unit economics don't work, and we've got to get more gross margin. So gross margin, that's like the profit on just the service alone.
Now, did I hear you correct? You said 50% the gross margin. Is that right?
50% is just, yeah, exactly. It's like a really rough rule of thumb. I mean, it's highly dependent on the kind of agency. So like if you're a highly specialized agency and you've got a very specific niche, and it happens to be a high demand niche, you might find yourself with a certain degree of pricing power where you might be able to earn north of a 60% gross margin, right? So again, I invoice for $50,000, and it only costs me whatever it is, $15,000 or $18,000 in service wages to service that. However, there are other models that are maybe more in the like staff augmentation kind of a realm, where I've got engineers, designers, and I'm just kind of like renting people, where the gross margin profile looks well south of 50%, right? It might look more like 35%, but that's pretty much the whole business. There's almost no overhead. Like we've got some, you might be able to do 35 gross margin and still earn 20% profit overall. So the point is, no agency is the same. So it's a little dangerous to hear 50%. Like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing 50%. Right? That's not necessarily the case. But your average agency is gonna mark up the cost 2.5 to 3 times the sort of cost basis. Like you're shooting for a rate per hour that looks 2.5, maybe 3 times the cost basis of that hour, right? So if it costs you $50 an hour fully loaded for the labor, you're gonna shoot for something like $150. But because the people are not fully utilized, right? You're not necessarily going to build them out 40 hours a week every week, and you wouldn't even try if you could. Your actual margin is going to look more like 2 times than like 2.5 or 3 times. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. What would you say? Like, this is just like me being curious now. What do you say is like the distribution? Is it kind of a standard distribution, bell curve of like, what's the percentage that are getting to that like 50%, and then what's it, what would you
50%
say
is
is
not, is probably a bell curve. I don't know.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting. We do plot this stuff. So we one
sure.
advantage, plug for Upsourced. We got a lot of data. We have a cool BI tool. And so we plot this stuff. We plot net margin, we plot gross margin. I bet it is a bell curve, but I can tell you for sure the median is not 50. Itself.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, that's just the thing. I think you should hear this as like a positive. If you find yourself as you're an agency owner and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing that, take 20%. These are numbers I have better committed to memory. We'll talk more about like, what's my net margin goal? And while 50% kind of varies, like some agencies can do 60, some in gross, some are probably closer to 35. There's a wide variety. 20% is a pretty good service-based target, right? There's not a lot of variability in there. If we're doing great, 20% is the target of net profit, but the median is well south of 20%. I think the median is like 11. And it's to be honest with you, it's kind of rare air to get to that 20%. And a lot of, and some of this is just intent, right? Some agencies are not entirely profit driven. There's other values and goals. They're more interested in sharing profits with their team. And so they're intentionally, deflating that profit margin. Others are just like, as long as it's greater than 0, we're good. So there's lots of reasons why, but yeah, the 20% is not the median, just like 50% is not the median. But 50% is possible. That I can tell you. I think in most cases, with the exception of some of these like staff aug cases, getting to 50% is possible with the right levers.
Yeah. So, and I think we can have probably for a different conversation, but I mean, for me, what I was, I've always sort of looked at is like, how are you reinvesting back in the business? Because to be able to grow, what I've seen is like, great, let's say you cleared 20%, but you're trying to grow 20% the next year. It's like, well, there went, that's what reinvestment looks like. And it's just kind of like this continual cycle of, because people have asked, they're like, hey, how did you grow EA? And it's like, well, I just, basically 20% growth over 10 years. Like we've just been like, whatever we made one year, we kind of reinvest back in the next year. And that might mean, expansion of the team, expansion of benefits, like being able to have, different things that we're investing in, because there's so like, it's always something else that's needed to like be able to grow it. And it doesn't just happen. You had mentioned like, we have no one that's doing outbound, but we do a lot. I mean, I have one person that I've now been able to say like, they're just committed sales, but that was an investment and we had to have them come on to be able to do that. You'd mentioned like the one thing I'd love to be able to dig into that a little bit. And I love this idea of like not necessarily worrying about KPIs, but at the same time, like, is there anything that they should do to maybe like prioritize them or not prioritize them, or just like, are there some important ones to look at? Like, what, because I haven't necessarily ever run our group with that in mind, but at the same time, I have tried to have some structures that we're measuring against and just saying like, all right, well, did we meet this? Did we not meet this?
Yeah. So what I would tell, first of all, just co-sign your thought around reinvestment. I just wanted to at least tell you that I think that's, I think the idea of like, I'm going to answer your question, but I want to, there's this like philosophy that out there that some like early agency owners use, which is called profit first. Have you ever heard of profit first, by the way? So there's a book about it. Like it's a way of managing your finances with profit first in mind, right? But the problem with profit first is that it sets like this, it sets 20% as like the non-negotiable. It takes your money and it puts it in this 20%. And like you just have to have it. And it's meant for discipline. It's like the piggy bank approach to like managing your business. The thing that I've always hated about profit first is that that's not every agency. Many agencies want to reinvest their profit for growth. And that's a perfectly rational thing to do. And so again, they should kind of set like, what's my pre-investment operating margin? Great. 19%, 18%, whatever it is. Hooray. Now I'm taking those and I can either distribute them or I can reinvest them. And having that structure to think about it, I think is really key. Anyways, I'll come back over to your question, which is.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I mean, yeah, I think a lot of people, they don't I think if you're just like pure numbers driven, it's probably easier to make money inside of another agency and like work up the big agency kind of like treadmill. But I think the advantage is being able to have control, being able to like
Totally.
have creative expression and freedom and who you're going to work with. And there's a lot of other things, but at the same
Yeah.
time, like being a healthy company so that, you know, that all the other, like, you know, that you've got your
Yeah.
first level of the pyramid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So the to answer your question, it's not necessarily that I think all KPIs are bad. I have this backwards. It's not necessarily that I think all KPIs are bad. It's just that I
Whoa.
don't
Your
think
sound
that you
effect was like so much better now. It's
I
funny.
pulled this out of my bag. Oh, here we go. Restart the whole thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, so it's not that I think all KPIs are bad. It's just that I don't prescribe to evaluating and managing them all at once. That's basically my attitude, because again, and we get that, you know, we talked about the concept of playing business. That's a classic, like, I want to manage to this like KPI dashboard like I'm flying a plane. I've got this dial and this dial and these dials, and this is, I got to really, and I just, I believe that there is probably at any given time just one thing to focus on. That one thing is probably measured by one or a couple KPIs. Like, so for instance, if we go through the hierarchy of financial needs and we identify a gross margin opportunity, like it's south of 50%, and we believe, again, one of the advantages of working with a firm like ours is, like, if you come to us and you're a $2 million branding agency or you're a $2 million Webflow agency, I guarantee you I have two clients exactly like you, and I have two clients that are a couple stages ahead of you, right? So I can tell you what is possible. We don't have to have this like philosophical debate about, oh, can an agency like mine earn a margin like that? Nope, trust me, they can, and let me show you. So you know, if we decide that we have a gross margin opportunity, then that is the focus. And by the way, when you have a gross margin, you kind of alluded to this, but like when you have a gross margin opportunity, the cause is one of two things, right? One thing is you're paying for service staff or service wages that are not generating revenue, right? They're not utilized. Your utilization rate, right? The amount of hours that are being spent on revenue generating projects divided by the amount of available hours, that utilization rate is too low, right? So you're paying too much for service people that aren't generating revenue, or your utilization is fine, but your rate per hour, right? That example I gave you before, where my cost basis is 50 and I'm shooting for $150 realized rate, where that rate is too low. And by the way, it's rare that somebody goes in assuming they're going to have a low rate. Like, I just want to charge, $90, and that's what I did. It's usually like, oh, I'm going to do a website project and it's going to take me, this many hours, and that's going to give me a $150 rate, and it'll be 150 hours. And then we're on hour 225 and we're still going and we have an extra build and the rates just plummeted. Like, that's generally what happens. And so I guess my whole point is, okay, great. Well, so there's a gross margin KPI that we want to keep an eye on. And there's either a rate per hour and or a utilization KPI that we want to keep our eye on, because that's really what's driving this. And so my point is, that's where we're going to focus, just those two things. And so we're going to ask ourselves, what's the solution? Is it a scoping? Is it, hey, we need to be better at scoping or defending our scope or having out of scope conversations or extra billing? Like, we're going to, the solution is always operational. We're going to do a thing, and now we're going to measure it. We're going to look at, 3 weeks from now, how does it look? 5 weeks from now, how does it look? And we're going to try to just show, we're just going to show progress on that until, that, I'm making this up, 32% gross margin is 45%. And we're feeling pretty good, or 50%. We're feeling pretty good about that number. Then it's not that we're going to just ignore gross margin, but the focus is now moving to the next thing in the hierarchy of financial needs, because we no longer need to just singularly focus on gross margin. We feel good about that. Now we're moving to the next thing. So again, I'm not saying, of course, we still need good financials. There are reasons to look at other things, but maybe what I like to speak in hyperbole, but maybe what I'm really saying is the 80/20 is got to be one thing. Like 80% of our focus has got to just be wherever the opportunity is in the hierarchy. But those are probably KPIs. It's just not a buffet of KPIs. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I think, as you were saying, sort of balancing those KPIs around, like, it's not a dashboard. It's not, it's like,
Yeah.
what is the the one or two things that you can move to really impact the business, and how to understand what those levers are. I'm curious, like as a kind of side, topic you mentioned around like um, the scoping and how important that is. Are there any themes that you see within agencies that have like, a good margin around like how they're approaching scoping or how they're controlling cost, or like, because as you're moving through these inflection points and just looking at, like, all right, hey, we were able to get just like a couple projects together, and then now you're moving into that next like $1 to $3 million range. Like, what are some of those like scoping themes that you've noticed or experienced within these different groups?
That's a great question. By the way, you should answer that question too, because I bet you have tried some things and learned some things, and you might have a take on it. Go ahead.
I think you can answer in aggregate, and I can probably answer.
You can answer in specifics
from my perspective. Yeah.
Well, and so my seat in the aggregate is there are a lot of ways to skin every cat, right? Like there's a lot of ways. It's not dissimilar from like predictable revenue generation, right? Like if I'm an agency, what are the different ways I could grow? I could grow through outbound sales. I can grow through becoming a prolific content creator and generating a lot of content that drives the lead magnets that converts through theirs. I can go in a bunch of different directions. Same with scoping. What I would tell you is the only thing that distinguishes an agency that is good at it from an agency that is not good at it is the agency that's good at it is doing it on purpose. Like that's it. So the agencies that are doing it haphazardly, like haphazardly would be, this is like 50,000. That sounds good. We're going to ship that. And then let's go. Like we're going to go until it's done. And then maybe we'll know that like intuitively this thing wasn't very profitable, or maybe not even, right? We're not going to measure our progress. We're not going to do kind of a consistent budget to actual. We're not going to have any kind of feedback loop to compare what the work is to what the original scope is. And the agencies that care, the ones that are saying we are going to build a process, which is we have a method, whatever that method is. It can be cost-based, it can be value-based, but we're going to have a method to coming up with how we arrived at this price. We're going to have a method for determining how many hours we think it's going to take. We are going to track our progress against those hours. And to the degree that we are pacing ahead of or behind what we thought, we are going to have a thing that we do. And it's often a conversation. Okay, great. Here's our, we're going to have a weekly meeting with our client. Hey, here's the thing. We're a little bit over hours and it's because of X, and that's a little out of scope. And here's what we can do about it, right? We can either dial that, we can either not do that, or if we want to continue down this path, we're going to have to add on, an extra bill for this particular project. It's going to go from 50 to 65. Green light to do that, or, do we want to sort of dial this back? So again, I have seen a bunch of different approaches, and they all work. I mean, my attitude is like a lot of these things, they all work. It's just a matter of like, are you doing it on purpose?
I mean, I think it's kind of like, there's a lot of paths to heaven type of thing.
Totally.
It's like, what are you believing in, and how do you have that system? And as you're looking at it in aggregate and seeing groups that are being intentional about it, I think for us, we have been intentional about how we approach scope, only because it's like, if I mess up a project, it could cost my house. Like that's the thing that people don't understand, is that it's not a project, it's a liability. And like until it's delivered, and even still then it could be a liability. But for us, we've done two different things, and it's interesting. Like the first 2 years in business, I actually didn't have a website, which people think like, oh, you have to have an amazing website, and
that story.
Like you have to have like the hottest work to be able to sell projects, and that's not the case. No. I sold all of our projects just with spreadsheets, and it was interesting because like people, as creatives, we think we need to bring beautiful pixels, and then we're selling them to numbers people, and like that buyer, they are going to better understand. Like I would go and break down the project into a wildly detailed spreadsheet, which like I made my own Gantt charts because I had seen a Gantt chart before, but I'd never like made one.
Yeah.
And so I went into Apple Numbers and then like formatted it so it all looked like a Gantt chart. I can like post it in the show notes afterwards. But then I would just list out every single activity that we were going to do for every single day and then tally that up against, a bill rate. And that would give like, at least something so that we were having a conversation. I could say, hey, what is, if you wanted to descope something, all right, well, let's go. We can take this line number. We can take this out. We can take this out. And it was a way to really like break that down into something that was going to be more approachable for them to understand the effort that they would need. And then on the flip side of that, getting that written up into a contract. So all of those assumptions are in there. And so when we say like, hey, we're going to do 2 design directions, or we're going to have 3 rounds of reviews, because it's like the design directions and the rounds of reviews are what can get you. And like you hire us like a doctor, so you're hiring us for our opinion. If you don't like our opinion, you can go and hire a different doctor, but you're still going to have to pay the doctor's bill.
Totally.
No, that's not what I would say on a client meeting, but that's kind of like, if it comes down to it, like that's sort of like the approach that we're taking, where you're getting that opinion. And then the other thing that I've always done is like, we don't ever in our contracts have, this is getting like into the weeds, but
no, go for it. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, we don't include acceptance language at all, because like you've accepted the project when you sign the contract, and like we have acceptance language. We don't have approvals. So it's not like work is approved. Work is accepted. Right. So it's, and then there's there's a window in which you can accept that, but it's not like the work is approved at the beginning of it. And it's not like, oh, I never approved that design direction. It's like, well, no, you approved
by default.
You've approved for us to do the 2 design directions. Whether or not you like them is subjective.
That's not exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's like, if we didn't design 2 directions, if we only did 1, then you can not accept it. And that's something that we can then go and write in the contract. But that's a long way of saying, and I think what you're getting to is having an approach, being rigorous around like what you're putting down, and not just kind of like rolling the dice and be like, oh man, because I've talked with different founders and they're like, yeah, I just kind of threw a big number at them and I think we can do it. And that's maybe you can, but
maybe you can, maybe you can't. I mean,
like do you just want to like, spin the wheel of chances around your business? Like that's where.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's and sometimes you just have to learn that the hard way. And so, but yeah, by the way, I think my favorite soundbite for this whole episode is going to be the fact that you did not have a website for the first 2 years. I feel like that's it's just my favorite story of like realizing what really matters and prioritizing that and stripping away all the other, like, I like to, small analogy or whatever, but like a lot of times I like to analogize the work that we do sort of like as like a weight loss exercise, right? And the financial data is like stepping on the scale, right? But ultimately we're not going to solve our problem by stepping on the scale and then stepping on the scale and stepping on the scale, right? If we step on the scale, we see a number we don't like. Ultimately it looks like some combination of diet and exercise, right? Exercise is like revenue generation. Diet is like cost, reduction and discipline. But the thing about exercise is when somebody is like, okay, I have to exercise, people like to overcomplicate the whole thing, right? They have to, they're like, oh, I'm going to lift weights, but like, should I do this kind of curl? Should I do that kind of curl? Should I get a personal trainer? Should I do this? It's like, you know what? Go to the gym and lift weights, ride a bike, get in the pool. Who cares? Just get moving. Like the 80 for 20 is the activity. All these other things are excuses for why you don't want to do the activity. And a website is a classic, like, oh, that's the perfect kind of press. And I don't like to do that kind of thing. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's definitely value to be added from it, but I think it's really easy for us to be like, well, the reason that I would be more successful if I had this just knocked down, beautiful website and it's like, you know what, you're not going to get any traffic. And ultimately that's probably not the most effective way for you to communicate your value. If your goal is to get in front of them with like either a good spreadsheet or a deck and a good value proposition, like that's what does this. So anyways, all that to say, stripping away the stuff that doesn't matter and focusing on the thing that does, like there's no better example than what you said. I love it.
Yeah. And the full story is it's like, hey, so I'd already been in the business for 13 years. People knew me. And I think a really valued aspect is it's a relationship business. And so
Yeah.
build those relationships and then provide value through the business. Um, the other, the other part is like we were starting off and I was very clear. My 80 for 20 was like, I wanted to do 80% work, which was just going to like pay the bills and make sure that we were in a good place. And then 20% was going to be like our stretch creative, like, doesn't matter if we make money. Like
Yeah.
we just, this is going to be like the work that will help to set us apart. But I can see that, I'll talk with some people and they'll get discouraged by like, oh, this work just isn't fulfilling to me or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, it can't all be,
Yeah.
you just have to have like your baseline, do something
Yeah.
you're really good at that's rinse and repeat. And then from there have that piece that gets you up in the morning and that you're excited about. And anyway, that's all.
Yeah. That's a good way to make sure that you are both disciplined from the, like, we get the right to keep playing this game,
Yep,
but also
exactly.
we haven't found ourselves in this like thankless, unfulfilling situation. Like I'm going to defend I'm going to make intentional space for both of the things that have to be true. I get to do some work that I enjoy, and I get to play the game for some perpetual period of time. I think that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. There's a question here from Lewis. I'd love to be able to get to it. What percentage of expenses typically allocated to marketing and sales? Like, how do you think about, what are some of the averages that you're seeing there in terms of that reinvestment?
This is a cop out of an answer than that. It like really depends. But, so for instance, it depends on the degree to which your business is a sales motion. Like a lot of agencies don't have typical sellers, right? A lot of agencies have a business development individual because a lot of the proposals are bespoke. And so it looks more account driven, and you've got a BD person that's kind of opening some doors. So, there's a substantial amount of our agencies who are spending sub 5% of revenue on marketing and sales. Now, the degree to which your business looks more, so I look at media. I ran a media agency. Our media agency, we'd spend 15% of revenue. We had a sales team, and these sellers are making a lot of money. Their base is in the six figures, and their OTE is twice that. And we had a big team of them, right? Because media is a thing that and this is how media sales go. Because media is a thing that it's not a creative pursuit at its core. And so you can standardize it, you can speak to it, you can kind of rinse and repeat a sale. And so like 15% sales and marketing for like tech companies who have sales teams is relatively common. I think much north of that, you're probably spending too much regardless of what kind of business you are. But it really depends is the bottom line. It really depends. I prefer to think about the marketing and sales motion in an ROI context, right? Like the dream is I've created this little box. I put $1 in the box, $3 pops out of the box. That's really what I'm trying to create. Sales is a somewhat simple thing. Like if you have some version of sales, like we have an outbound sales team. And so it's quite easy to quantify the sort of ROI on our cost for sales. So ultimately, as long as I'm ROI positive, and some piece of this looks like, what's the, if I'm selling long-lived retainers, I'd be willing to pay a higher percentage of my current revenue today on that salesperson. If I'm selling small projects, I'd be willing to spend a lower percentage on sales. But anyways, the short answer is it's generally not a huge number for agencies because again, you're getting a lot of assist from your service people, like your account people who are combination strategists, and they're coming in and they're supporting in a large way, like the sales motion. So anyways, hopefully that's helpful. As long as it's profitable for you, you're working for the magic box, $1 in, $3 out.
I love that. I'd love to have a magic box. Or I could put $1 in and get $3 out.
We're all working for the magic box. I don't know that many people who
Yeah.
have a magic box. I think it's like you put $1 in and you're just like, please.
Like,
it's $1.50.
please,
Okay,
dollar,
we'll
come
take
back
it. We'll
out.
take it. Exactly.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
lost the $1 and it's gone. Okay.
Yeah.
But on average, I mean, again, and on average, you do
Yep.
start to see some degree of consistency and repeatability and predictability. And that just to be clear, that's not very common even at this stage we're talking about. I mean, once you're sort of north of 3 to 4 million, there is a degree of predictability there, but you know, it's elusive. It's definitely harder in the creative space. There's no question.
Yep. Well, I know we've got let's see, a couple more minutes here. I'd love to see if there's looks like we got a really good crew of people that are watching. So thanks for kind of hanging around and listening to us, chit chat around some different ideas here. And Ryan, as always, thank you for jumping in. You've got such a wide perspective and it's amazing to hear. And, I always learn something when, you're able to talk through some of these ideas, and I'll probably still next week ask you about the difference between gross and net margin.
I'll send you like a guide or something, like a one sheet.
Yeah, like I generally get it, but sometimes,
I'm just kidding.
Sometimes I literally have to go back in and I'm like, gross, right? But I would say one, if there's any questions that are out there, and Luis, thanks for throwing that in, just throwing them into chat. Otherwise, got a couple other themes that I'd just love to dive into, and I'll let you pick like what's the best way to kind of round out, for today. Is it talking about maybe some of like, financial goals and targets, or is it, we talked a little bit around, budgeting as it relates to, projects, and then starting to look at some of the fundamentals there, or even just like, a good time to start to look at, when to seek financial advice. Like, what is it, when should an agency owner start to look at that? And so I don't know, maybe from like those buckets, what do we want to talk about for today, and then what do we want to kind of leave for next time? And by the way, the other thing that I'd love to do, and we talked about this and we just weren't able to get it together, is there's a lot of people within the Webflow space, and I'd love to have kind of a round robin. You're about to go out and I believe be on paternity leave, so that's awesome. But maybe sometime,
on the other side, that'd be
on
fun.
The other side of that, we could get kind of like an open conversation where people could go in and join us within this and say like, hey, like I'm struggling here, like, what. So, but and I feel like we're just barely scratching the surface here of a lot of these different things.
Well, I'd say of those, we kind of hit on the financial. I'll hit the financial goals and targets really quickly, because that's a bit of a punctuation mark on some of the things that we've talked about, and I may have mentioned them all, so this will be a restatement. And then I'll leave budgeting and forecasting. We have like lots of things with strong opinions about, so, but that's kind of a bigger thing. So we'll leave that for later. And then, I can talk about like when would be the right time to get some support as well. So with regard to the financial targets, again, this is, as I think about this stage, we are predominantly focused on the hierarchy of financial needs. This does cover the 80 for 20 if you're trying to grow a profitable agency and exit. The solvency is simply, can I pay my bills, right? So do I have cash on hand? So there's no target there. That's just, get through it. Then we did talk about gross margin or project profit, right? So again, wide variety, but like the reasonable rule of thumb is 50 is a pretty good. If you're sub 50, there may be an opportunity. If you're meaningfully sub 50, there's definitely an opportunity on gross margin. And then on cash reserves, we like to target 3 months of operating expenses. So again, these are fixed monthly obligations. They would not include variable freelance costs. In other words, like I don't have to pay for this person unless I sell more work, right? They would exclude that. But anything that you are on the hook for, assuming you don't make cost cuts or headcount cuts. So we like to have 3 months of that. We adjust that upwards or downwards depending on the risks and the type of the business. So if you have a recurring revenue business or you've got a lot of retainers, you can sustain a lower amount of cash on hand because there's more predictability in your cash flow. However, if you have a lot of concentration risk, or you've got, a lower degree of visibility than normal, or, you've got just a chunkier than normal kind of business, then you might want more than 3 months of or if we're heading into economic uncertainty, like the first and to some degree second quarter of this year, more is better. Operating profit margin. This is where there's less variability than there is on the growth side. 20% is, again, that's the gold standard for the service business. I'll tell you, I've got some of our best agencies are north of 30%. It is absolutely done. It is. I'm not sure if it's possible at this 1 to 3 million phase. I mean, there is some level of just this. These are the fixed costs that are going to be incurred for any business of any size, but they're not going to scale linearly. So the larger you get, the larger that denominator becomes, right? So it's easier to earn a higher margin. So 20% is kind of, that's the ideal mark. And then finally, in terms of like predictable revenue growth, no clear targets other than like, do you have it? The only other thing I'll say that's related to gross margin is utilization. So utilization becomes it's a key input to, can I generate an adequate gross margin? People ask us for utilization targets a lot. There's a lot of variability here too. I think what we see on the averages is that the firm-wide utilization looks like somewhere between 60 and 70%. That includes non-service-based people. So some of those people are just never going to be utilized. Service-based people, we prefer to see somewhere between 70 and 90%. I mean, 80 is kind of a good middle ground. And it really depends on the kind of staff, right? So if you've got easy to hire / recruit, you've got a high degree of predictability in the role, it's somewhat a fungible. These are often more junior roles. You'd see a higher utilization target, maybe closer to 90%. And for folks that are, maybe account based, where they're going to support the sales motion, or you've got people who are more specialized, and if you needed another person, the time to hire is really long, you might want to give yourself more flexibility, a lower utilization rate, so that if you got new work, you could deploy them quickly and those. But it's a balance, right? If your utilization rate is too low, you're not going to earn enough gross profit. And if it's too high, you can't sell new work. So it's a dance, right? That's why there's a too high and a too low. But on the service side, 70 to 90 is kind of where we see ourselves. So broad targets, be very careful for anybody that tells you your agency should do this. Every agency is a unique snowflake. So use these illustratively, not deterministically, but
sure,
that's what we see.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really interesting. It's a great sort of snapshot as well for a lot of the stuff that we've talked about for today. And cool. If I should just touch on the sort of, the last thing, and I think we could probably have a different conversation on like, what are the pain points in which you need to be able to, get some additional help and things along those lines. For me, it was just one, being able to sleep at night. And, there's a lot of stress that goes along with a lot of this stuff, and how to be able to focus on the one thing that doesn't also, that the financials can be such a big part of it, and how to be able to have kind of some help there, where, because I was just diving into spreadsheets and doing a 3 month, 6 month type of kind of like where, how does sales start to line up to cash flow, start to line up to booked business, and what do those lines look like? And they all go like this, right? So they're all just like down and to the right, which is not what you want. Like, every other like SaaS company, it's like up and to the right, and like for services companies, it's down and to the right. And I think just trying to be able to, have some more of that like business acumen that you can build into your day to day, and start to look at some of those different things. So anyway, that was probably my side story of that. And then I think for EA, like we're investing in a lot of I think, again, getting into that reinvestment that we've been doing for a while. And like, we've been investing in products, and we've been investing in like how to grow the team. And we're in, the Webflow space, which is an emerging space. And our utilization, it hovers around probably like 50 to 60%, but it works for us. And like, we've still done fine as a company. And but we're trying to stay ahead of this curve. And I think that's the other thing, is like all of these numbers, it's so different. And I think it's trying to be able to just understand where you're like as a runner. So, we're both runners, and, I'm sure you've been running, and like someone will pass you and you're just like, got to focus on your run, because probably exactly 2 miles down the road, like you're going to pass them, or you're just you're doing a half marathon, they're doing a 3K. Like there's just, you'll think like, oh man, like looking at the other person and just trying to focus on your run. So that's probably
1,000
where
ways
I'd
to
leave
do
stuff
it.
for today.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. I agree. Cool. Well, this was fun, Mason. Thanks again for having me back. It's always good. It's always good.
Yeah, well, I hope to be able to introduce you to kind of more people within the Webflow community. I'd love to have Matt from 80/20 over, because like you talk about 80 for 20 all the time, and we have a good friend of mine that's running an agency called 80/20, so you guys would probably hit it off.
Yeah.
Like I'd love to, just there's so many people that are in kind of these different points, and kind of being able to just build up more of this like minimum business acumen, for people. So,
Cool.
And then if there's other stuff that you're doing as well for Upsourced, and I can like jump into, an agency's roundtable or stuff along those lines, keep me updated.
Would love to do that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
So cool. All right. Well, everyone that's hanging around, thanks so much.
Yes.
This has been really fun. And as you have questions, throw them into the comments, or, like send them over on Twitter.
Cool.
Awesome. All right. See you, everybody.
See ya.
Thanks very much.
See ya.